say, in the current effort by Somalia to, I would not say eliminate, but at least win over Al-Shabaab. I'd like to just make two quick observations. Number one, I think with Obasanjo, you have to recall that he was a colonel in the Nigerian army in the 1967 Biafra War, which resulted in genocide. And the most prominent Nigerian Igbo poet, Christopher Akambo, whom Ali Mazrui wrote a very fascinating account, chided and criticized the Igbo elite who were part of the genocide. It is very Orwellian to make Obasanjo the presiding authority to stop another genocide. This is just how Africa works. It's proverb of saying the fox that man is the hen is really playing here. Obasanjo should never have been somebody who would preside over the resolution of a genocide, because he was part of his own people's genocide. In terms of the whole AU and this and that, as a Somali, when I reflect back, probably we were the first African nation, and Dave Sheen could testify to this. We were the first people, whether we are in Kenya or in Somalia or in Ethiopia, to have lost trust in the structure of the AU and OAU before that. Because our history told us and taught us that OAU and then afterward is AU cannot resolve the African problems. And on top of that, in the last 60 years, the leadership that has taken the mantle of power in Africa is nothing but an autocratic dictatorial circle. So today, in my opinion, AU is staffed by former leaders of Africa or high-placed bureaucrats in autocratic regimes. What solution can they bring to an issue like the Ethiopian issue? It's just a question that we need to ponder as we go and search solutions for this, for the Ethiopian quagmire. I think Al-Shabaab and Ma'awisley is something that we need to reflect. Well, although I welcome Hassan Sheikh Mohamoud's new effort to fight and go Al-Shabaab where they are, but on the flip side of this issue is that Ma'awisley is born out of its frustration of the absence of Somali security structure to protect people and to help people. So on the one hand, yes, the new government of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud is moving in this direction. On the other hand, it was its absence, or the government in general, Somalia's National Army's absence to protect. They have scored certain goals and objectives so far. Al-Shabaab has been supposedly defeated in some parts of Iran region and Beledweyne. I think what I'm worried is whether those successes are sustainable or not. Because the Ma'awisley effort is people rising up, but the companion issue is that effort streamlined? Is there a command and control center that is disciplined? Is Ma'awisley just a revolt that is short-lived, or the Somali government will put all its effort to sustain the gains that so far? Now, it could be successful if the revolt of the local militia remains a Somali-led, Somali-owned process. My fear is that, knowing how the Somali state is fragile, that Somali ownership could be lost. And vultures like Ethiopia, from Aret Kilo, could see some advantage in coaxing the Somali leadership to give Ethiopia a part to play for its own sake, which would backfire because the moment that Ma'usley and people of Iran region and people of Beledweyne hear that Ethiopia is part of the quote-unquote pacification of Al-Shabaab, things could change. Because more than Al-Shabaab, or at equal terms, Somalis have also suspicion against Ethiopia. So if, and we know that President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud concluded his tour in Addis Ababa for 2 days, and one of the issues raised in their conversation was to collaborate and coordinate security issues, including the fight of Al-Shabaab. I don't know how deep that goes into giving a role to Ethiopia, but it would be a colossal mistake if the new leadership of Somalia gives Ethiopia any role beyond the ATSAM and IGAD that it already has for Ethiopia to play. There is just such a deep suspicion about Somalis when it comes to Ethiopia in their affairs. And I hope it doesn't bring Ethiopia to play. I think there are some lessons to be learned from the era of EPRDF, whether one likes it or not. And I was a critic of EPRDF from 1991 up to now. And I was thinking this morning I could speak to some of the issues in terms of the reversal of fortune that we see with Eritreans, with some of the Amaras. I recall when the current UN rep was Taye Askeselassie was assigned to Los Angeles to become the consulate. They almost killed him. The very forces that are now supporting him, and I know individuals by their names, they almost killed him. And he came to me at the time I was working for the city of Los Angeles to open up doors for him. This is very strange, the lack of consciousness and morality about Ethiopian leadership. Today, the guy Taye talks about genocide as it never happened. His side is the very forces that could not give him even a resting time in LA to sit back and do his work. And here is a Somali who believed in the greater African issue, and at least somebody who is a guest to come to LA to be left alone and helping. And I really, I cringe when and he knows me and he probably is watching this. I cringe when I see people like Ambassador Taye, who were part of the core leadership of EPRDF, to today act like TPLF leadership or their enemy, and they have to come and arrest them and eliminate. This is the crazy culture of Ethiopian politics that David Sheen is very aware of. And in another format, he talked about himself, David meaning, how Ethiopian negotiation is not part of the equation in any situation, historically as well as current. One side should be eliminated, and that's what you see. Anyway, in the Al-Shabaab situation, there's one lesson that Somalia needs to learn from the EPRDF era, and I just gave an interview to Al Arabiya piece, and that is, in addition to the Liu police, in the era of EPRDF, you used to have local militia at the district and the village level that really served as the eyes and ears of the regional governments to help make sure that Al-Shabaab doesn't come. One of the reasons why Al-Shabaab never really ventured into the Somali region in Ethiopia was not because of the Liu police, but because of the local militia. It also exists in the Oromia region, especially in the Muslim area. And I think if the government of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud buttresses the Ma'usley forces with some sort of local militia at the village level, at the district level, then they can contain. As you heard it today, they came back to a couple of locations. Al-Shabaab came back to a couple of locations because there was no infrastructure left after they were liberated. So there is a long road to go, but I will just watch for those two things to make sure that Ethiopia doesn't get involved in the pacification and fight of Al-Shabaab at this time. And number two, to follow up with an infrastructure to protect the areas that are liberated, including the services profession. And I think they can learn lessons, as I said, from the EPRDF. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Faisal. And you mentioned Ambassador Shin's work in this area. And I want to turn it to Ambassador Shin now for a question. I want to stay on the topic of Somali just for a moment. Ambassador Shin, you have authored numerous writings on China's influence and involvement in Africa. Somali diaspora efforts in the United States and the UK are thought to be one of the main reasons that China's gas deals in the region were canceled recently. Ethiopia terminated its oil contracts with China in hopes of attracting American corporations into the region. The Somali people and their institutions have been vocal in their opposition to these natural resource deals. What do you believe is the future of oil and gas exploration in the region and elsewhere throughout the country?
I think there are two issues involving the future of gas and oil in the Ogaden region or in the Somali region generally. One is how economically viable is it? And there are many who think it is economically viable or could be over the course of time. The other issue is security and the ability of any foreign company to go into the region and know that it could do its work without being concerned about the security situation. The Chinese company that was recently asked to shut down its operation in the Ogaden, GCL Petroleum Corporation holding company, has been active in the Ogaden region since 2013. There were a series of agreements with the government of Ethiopia about what it was expected to do during its operations in the Ogaden. As I understand it, the government of Ethiopia concluded that the Chinese company was not fulfilling its contractual obligations and therefore shut it down, which is reasonable enough. Any government is permitted to do that. As far as other companies, including American companies, coming in to replace the Chinese company, I have not heard of any American company that is showing any particular interest in going into Somali region. Maybe there is one somewhere that I haven't heard of, but I'm skeptical of that. I think that the security situation alone, even in Tigray, which is well removed from Somali region, is enough to normally scare off American companies going into a country where there clearly are security issues. This may also have been the reason why the Chinese company did not fulfill its contractual obligations. I haven't heard the rationale from the Chinese company as to why they failed to meet the demands, but I would not be at all surprised but what it had something to do with security issues. So from my standpoint, I'm not very optimistic that any foreign country is going to be rushing into the Ogaden region, so long as you have an ongoing conflict in Tigray, which is slopped over into Amhara region and Afar region, and which is not that far away from Somali region, and where you had Al-Shabaab actually going into Somali region several months ago. That was a very short-lived intervention into Somali region, but it could happen again. So I'm not looking for foreign engagement anytime soon in Somali region.
Thank you, Ambassador. That's good to know. And we have about, I believe it is 17 minutes left in the program, and our answers have been lengthy. And so I want to give everybody maybe 2 or 3 minutes, either for a final remark or to answer the specific question. And Ambassador Shin, I'll get started with you. What do you think is key to rebuilding Ethiopia as a whole in the next 2 to 5 years? Or if there's anything else in this conflict that we have not discussed that you think is important for our audience to understand, I'd ask you to share them now. And again, panelists, if we can keep it between 2 to 3 minutes, that'd be great.
Well, as others have said, the issues in Ethiopia go well beyond Tigray. We've focused mostly on Tigray in this session because I think that is the most immediate problem, but it certainly is not the only one. The problem in the longer term problem in Ethiopia is one of compromise and a willingness to listen to others, to understand that you don't have a monopoly on knowledge in any particular region or any particular ethnic group, to be more inclusive in terms of involving those people of goodwill who would like to see the continuation of a unified Ethiopia, which I would like to see, quite frankly, and involving more civil society, more women in the efforts to resolve the problems of Ethiopia. As I said at the outset of this program, unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic at the moment in terms of the Tigray conflict. I'm afraid it has been militarized to the point that we may end up seeing a military solution to it. So all of these other efforts that I've just referred to are probably not going to happen anytime soon, but they are the things that must happen if Ethiopia is to survive as a coherent, successful nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Same question. I'll turn it over to Diplomat Johannes. Either anything that we missed that the audience must know, or what do you think is key to Ethiopia's success in terms of the next 2 to 5 years?
Thank you. There's a little bit of problem with the connection, so I'm not going to open my video, if that's okay, Hussein.
Absolutely, no problem. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So Tigray still believes that a peaceful solution is possible, but a peaceful solution will be possible if and only if the regimes both in Ethiopia and Eritrea could be pressurized to the maximum. We remember Rene and Ambassador Shin were mentioning the 1998. We remember how the Isaias regime came into peaceful resolution to the aggression in Ethiopia in 1998. It was after decisively pushed on the ground. Unless this time we have either a push on the ground, a decisive one, or else the international community pressurized the two regimes actually. It's a stark violation of international laws, as you know it. Eritrea is aggressing a territory, a sovereign territory, and the international community is muted. So if we need a peaceful resolution, I think we need to come up with these two. I think as we speak, one of the Ethiopian generals is in Doha, Qatar. I guess Getachew Mohammed. They are talking about arms deal. They are talking about cooperation, military cooperation between Ethiopia and Qatar. We know that there is still recruitment on the ground. We know that there is procurement of arms. So the Ethiopian regime and the Eritrean, we know what they are doing. They are mobilizing everybody actually, including 60 years of old and so on. So the international community, we should come up with a tangible push. If not, as Ambassador Shin said, that the ultimate solution will be a military at the end of the day. But we wish, as Tigray, we wish we could resolve the problem peacefully, and we still believe that it's possible with the help of the international community. I thank you, Hussein, and the organizers.
Thank you, Diplomat. Same question. I'll turn to Dr. Ezekiel for your thoughts.
I would start from where I started. I would start saying that from where I started, that what the biggest problem that Ethiopia faces is the violent dissolution of the state. So there are two actors that could help. One is internal, the other is external. The external is the international community. The international community right now have put their faith in the national dialogue to resolve all outstanding problems in Ethiopia, in addition to ending the war through cessation of hostilities, that they're going to use what they know from the books, from the experiences that they have, and apply it to Ethiopia. If that is the case, there is one thing that the international community should be concerned about, that the dissolution is either going to be Czechoslovakia style or the Yugoslavia style. That's what the problem is. Resolving it begins with the recognition of the depth of the problem. So Ethiopia really faces not just Yugoslavianization at this moment. As far as I'm concerned, Ethiopia faces Rwandization. That should be the concern. that should be the concern of the international community. So if the international community wants to resolve the problem, and the problem for themselves as well, because a violent dissolution of the Ethiopian state would send refugees all the way to the southern shores of Europe. Recognize the problem, the depth of the problem, and the trajectory of the war itself. Even if this war is going to end by, let's say, the TDF winning, what would happen the day after? How would you bring Ethiopia together? So what the international community should be worried about is that the current administration in Ethiopia has done a good job of dismantling the state, has done a good job of severing all cultural and religious and other ties that bind people together in Ethiopia. So the issue of territorial integrity or the country's national unity has already been dismantled. So if they really want to do something about it, is what about a year ago, Alex Rondos and Mark Medici proposed, and that is the Dayton peace process style. Force these Ethiopian combatants into the negotiating table by using any diplomatic arsenal that they have, putting aside diplomatic niceties, and then avert the coming Rwandization of Ethiopia. That is the problem. And internally, there must be some sort of a national salvation, because that's what the problem is. National Salvation Convention, where all Ethiopian forces that are now in conflict get together around a negotiating table and craft a settlement, another political settlement that will probably govern Ethiopia for the next 100 years. These two are the issues that I see should be worked out.
Thank you. Thank you. Esaias, any final thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you very much. So I think I just want to talk a little bit about the viability of the peace process, the peace talk, because it depends on many factors. First, there is a correlation between the Horn of Africa situation and the security of Ethiopia. Obviously, because Ethiopia, like I said, is the powerhouse, the political powerhouse of Africa. The African Union is housed in Ethiopia, and many international organizations are in Ethiopia. And also Ethiopia is the second largest in the entire Africa. And Ethiopia is also located adjacent to the Red Sea corridor, which is the main trade route to Europe and America and many other countries. So these are very critical considerations. So after Abiy assumed political power, Ethiopia's role in UN mission, for example, is reduced because when Abiy recalled many of the soldiers, the peacekeepers in Somalia, most of whom were Tigrayan soldiers and including senior military officials, very experienced, it created a vacuum, and Al-Shabaab started to mushroom. Recently there has been multiple attacks by Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and that's one of the problems for the deteriorating the peace process in the Horn of Africa. And I think the second factor is the West and its intentions. So the United States and Europe has been trying to resolve the crisis in Ethiopia. We all know that. But I think, as we all know, the UAE and Turkey has been using their drones during the recent war in Tigray in Ethiopia. And these drones use or utilize Western technologies partly. So my concern is that if the West wants to end this war, and at the same time there are credible sources that these drones, the UAE and Turkey drones, are using United States and Canada technologies. So that's very confusing. So I'm not clear about that, the intention of the West to end the war. So that being said, I think any negotiation efforts can work depending on certain factors. First, the mechanism. So, in order to resolve any political crisis or conflict, you have to have a mechanism. The African Union as institution is, I think, one of the potential to resolve. But however, I think it's not practical because the African Union, from its genesis, from the very beginning, it's a post-colonial institution mainly designed to restore and continue regimes. So once the European colonizers left Africa, many of these, the current dictators they have to replace that vacuum, and they're meant to continue and restore regime. So basically, the African Union is concerned about governments and regimes, not people. And for that, African Union failed in Rwanda when the genocide was committed, Somalia, in Libya, South Sudan. So when all this crisis happened, the African Union was just watching. So the African Union is just a useless institution up to the minimum. Article 4 of the African Union Constitution, or the Constitutive Act, allows the Union to interfere whenever there is serious humanitarian crisis in one of the countries. So throughout these 2 years, there's been very serious human rights violation in Ethiopia, including Oromia, Tigray, but the African Union turned a blind eye. They're muted. Actually, the chairperson lives in Addis, in the capital. He has seen like many Tigrayans, up to 30,000 Tigrayans has been incarcerated in concentration camps. But whenever asked, he would say this is a law enforcement operation to restore the territorial integrity of Ethiopia. So I don't have any faith in African Union and the people personally. So that's one of the problems. So the Ethiopian peace process is not going to work because the African Union as institution and individual leaders are not capable. They're not willing and able to resolve the crisis. European Union and US, they're doing their best, but at the same time, there's a gray area. So I'm not clear about it. At the same time, the technologies has been utilized against the Ethiopian civil.
I apologize. If you could just make it, if you can wrap it up so I can ask the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, well, so my last conclusion is, in order to have a very meaningful, peaceful resolution, there has to be political will, good faith, a functional judicial and political process. None of them exist in Ethiopia. The African Union, European Union, all of them failed. So I think, that being said, I don't think there's hope to a peaceful resolution. Like I concur with my brother that only military solution could resolve it. That's my last conclusion.
Thank you. I want to turn to Renee now for the same question. Anything we missed that is important for the audience to know and understand about what's happening in Ethiopia, or what do you see as a potential future for Ethiopia in the next 2 to 5 years?
So thank you. Let me start by taking note of what happened in this meeting, or to summarize what I've understood from this meeting. From an outsider, it's very surprising to see the focus which is always put on the international community, the foreigners, the UN, the African Union, etc., etc., etc. Look at the comments which were published or aired about the end of the truce and the re-beginning of a war. So it looks like now many Ethiopians have accepted that the fate of their country is in the hands of foreigners. And this surprised me a lot, because Ethiopia is a symbol of sovereignty and independence in Africa and even in the world. So this leads me to recall two main features of the Ethiopian history. During the 30s, when Haile Selassie had the will to modernize his country, the first group of what could be called the intellectuals, Ethiopian intellectuals, appeared. They were called the Japanese, and they helped the emperor to find a way to modernize the country. Now, in the 60s, at the end of the 60s, 70s, Ethiopia had become, the imperial regime had become totally sclerotic. And then a movement appeared, the student movement, which at least thought about and propose a different way, a way to allow Ethiopia to progress. If this way was the right one or the bad one is another question, okay? But now I didn't hear anything coming from the intellectual community as such. On the opposite, many, the majority of the Ethiopian intellectuals have contributed to this accelerated polarization of the Ethiopian society and to this the growth of what is usually called the ethnic hate. But I don't believe that any lasting solution could be found in Ethiopia without first and foremost an Ethiopian solution. The outsiders, they could only help. They cannot be the main actors of a solution in Ethiopia. So this, I would say that I believe that the intellectuals, Ethiopian intellectuals, have a very crucial role to play now. In my view, they are the only ones who can discuss together and I would say mark even only an embryo of roadmap to elaborate an innovative solution to the main question of the state building in Ethiopia. It doesn't need a world conference with, I don't know, many hundreds of people. It must start, and it can start very, very modestly, but it must start with a small group of very highly educated people who would gather together and start to discuss. And then I believe they could be progressively, step by step, joined by not only other educated people, but also opposition representatives of opposition parties, representatives of the civil society, etc., etc. They have the duty to show the way. They cannot, or in my view, I will be very frank, the Ethiopians cannot rely on the international community to solve their problems. Thank you, and thank you for having invited me to this meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Renee, and excellent points. I thank you for those. Dr. Faisal, I want to turn it to you for final thoughts.
Yes, thank you very much. And I enjoyed listening to my colleagues here, and I completely endorse Renee's concept at two levels. I think Ethiopian intellectualism, and for that matter, the whole intellectuals have been subjected to NGO culture, in which case they seek solutions exterior from outside. When did the US, for that matter, or US and international groups ever solve Ethiopia's problem, or for that matter, any African conflict? Why is so much attention put on US and lobbying when we know that they have never solved it? Zaire, after 25 years, is still in the same position it was, actually getting worse. So at that level, I endorse Renee's concept. I am not a student of the Horn of Africa who begs for US resolution. 2 years, actually it has gotten worse between the first time the Tigray conflict happened and where we are today. The very element is that we thought were a bit progressive in the State Department are today literally in an indirect way justifying the genocide and the war. I'd like to mention here Samantha Powers, for whom I had tremendous respect in terms of her earlier work today. is now even in the position to negotiate with Abiy to see if she can buy his wheat to infuse cash to their cashless at Kilo. We've also seen how the envoy's attitude and Blinken's commentaries have been changing. When has America ever solved, since the Haile Selassie days, the Ethiopian conflict? I think it's just a pie in the sky to expect that. I'll also endorse René's concept of a localized solution, and I'll come back to that. But I see the status quo of Ethiopia to get worse, or stay at least in a stalemate. 3 years ago, I wrote an article where I identified 3 scenarios of the Ethiopian state. At the time, I didn't include the Rwanda, the tax scale. I think that's one scenario. I identified the Yugoslavia style. I also identified, and this was 2019, the other scenario that Ethiopia could end up was the Russian style, some amicable divorce for certain regions that the central government says they cannot hold. At the time I was thinking of Somali region, but definitely Tigray region is another where unless some medication, serious medication is found for what had happened in the last 2 years in Tigray, holding to Tigray, in my opinion, is also very difficult. The third is what I borrowed from Scale, which is the ruralization of Ethiopia. But there is also a fourth scenario, more and more I am now buying into, the Zairization of Ethiopia. The Zaire, where some regions will just remain volatile, just problematic. NGOs and the UN will be talking about how to work. Lately, we read a situation where makeshift airfields exist in Zaire, where this European mafia type planes come in, give weapons to whoever group that they want, and then take whatever they want in terms of diamonds and minerals. Ethiopia is close to that because 2 areas of Ethiopia has lost its sovereignty. On the Sudan side, Ethiopia has no sovereignty at all. On the Eritrean, it does not. Abiy is in no position today, even if the world forces to say no to Isaias. So the Ethiopian, I think it was Isaias earlier, Ethiopia's territorial integrity is a passé. How you can regain it is another issue. The West had many options to get rid of the problem and even pacify Isaias, but it won't do it, both for international reasons and for other reasons. Arming Tigray would have taken care of Isaias instantly, in days. Unifying Tigray's forces with Eritrean opposition could literally immobilize Isaias in days, if not at the maximum months. Having said that, I think the second concept I will borrow from René is a localized mediation and conference to talk about small scale. I think a Somali group called Congress for Somali Cause has already proposed that, René, small scale, consisting of several groups and intellectuals from all the nationalities and nations, gather them, iron out the issues. They have already put together a proposal. And I think that kind of small scale can begin a process that's inclusive, that is free, that is more open discussion for Somali to bring their historical injustice, as Skayal mentioned, because genocide and blockade and siege happened to Somalis in 2010. The world didn't really make up much about it. To justify, put a little commentary, my father is a survivor of a 1948 genocide, where in a village that had 200 people, about 20 of them survived. Nobody knows. So I think a local discussion can open up both the past as well as the present issues, as well as even some of the conditions. Today in Addis Ababa, the Iraqi demonstration turned into against Abiy and Shimal's demonstration, where they were shouting down to Naftanya, down to Abiy, down to, these are the people, or the Oromo, who some people say they have the power. So I think we need to go deeper. I really buy the concept of going small scale, there is a planning concept that says small is beautiful. Schumpeter made this concept in the 1940s. Small is beautiful and small is possible to do. So with the Congress for Somali Cause, we can probably start that and then reach out to several groups and see if we can really re-own our process from the NGOs and the State Departments and what have you, whose interest I really don't know at this point in time what they are looking for, because the death of a Tigranya mother, the burning of Oromo village is no longer a priority for the State Department. There are other things that may be priority for big nations and countries, but what matters for you and me is not really a priority. So we need to center our priority and start talking about local conversation that we own. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. And it's clear we could talk about this for hours if we have the time, truly. So I think we'll need a part 2, Hafsa. But I want to thank our panelists for this discussion, and I wish we could have got deeper. There's so much more to discuss, but I want to thank you all, and I'll turn it over to Hafsa for final comments. Thank you, Hafsa.
Thank you to our moderator, co-founder of Tigray Action Committee, Housen Gebremedin. Ethiopia is at a critical juncture, and the future of the Horn of Africa is clearly uncertain. Collectively, we can make a change to bring atrocities in Ethiopia to an end. So this is one of the many discussions to come in the near future. The Institute will be holding an event in Minnesota in the coming month or so. I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists and our moderator and the Institute of the Horn of Africa Studies for holding such an important conversation. So thank you all and have a wonderful Saturday.
Thank you.
Ashama harka fuuni kabajamtoota fi daawwattoota hordoftoota Kuush Miidiyaa ni
gootummaa keerraafteef dukkanni gabrummaa.
Oromoon har'a maal keessa jira? Asirratti yaada maal qabdu? ብዙ አጀንዳዎች አሉ። ሰፊ ሀተታ ያለው መግለጫ ስለሆነ በዚህ መግለጫ
Some Oromo